What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college basketball Week 11 top 25. As always, I have Ty joining me to break down our rankings for this week. But before we get into it, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below to be entered into our 500 subscriber giveaway. All you have to do is just hit that subscribe button to be entered to receive possibly an autographed item of your choice. But we'll first start with the drop from rankings, and we have Duke, which is very surprising. Missouri, and Wisconsin. And Ty, I'll let you take the floor here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Duke has to be a big surprise. Even after losing Coach K, they still have very high expectations. Obviously, very talented, at least supposed to be very talented, and they've really struggled over the last few weeks. So I think there's gonna be a lot of question marks, especially with Coach K gone. John Shire's never been a head coach, so that's just gonna ramp it up even more for them. So we'll see what happens.
And then in the others receiving votes, you got some good teams. This was made after, the Michigan State loss to Purdue today. But, if we're going into the week, you got to put State in that conversation. Then you got Rutgers and Marquette, who are both ranked in the AP poll, but not ours. And, you mentioned it before we started. New Mexico beat San Diego State. And then obviously St. Mary's seems to always find their way in this or into the rankings just because of the weak conference they're in. But Ty, which one of these teams, could possibly see themselves jump into our rankings next week?
I gotta look at Rutgers as a team that's really on the rise. Michigan State's probably the best of these teams. Marquette might have something to say, but I think Rutgers is a really hot team right now, a team that no one really wants to play. They play some ugly basketball at times, but that's how they like to play. So I think they're going to be dangerous.
Yeah, for me, I got to go with New Mexico. This team was ranked just a few weeks ago, and then they hit a wall, lost two straight, but they got that big rebound game over San Diego State, meaning that this team could be a mid-major to watch out for in March and possibly make an upset or two. So don't forget about that Lobo roster. And then we'll start with 25 with the Arkansas Razorbacks. Tough, tough week for them as they lost two, and especially the big loss to Vanderbilt on the road by 13. And the Must Bus is taking a pit stop right now. They're getting gas. They need to refuel up. They have not looked very good in the SEC play. Obviously, four of those five losses have came in SEC play. And we thought this team would get beat up in the SEC, and they have been right now. So they really need to flip the script this week, starting this week, go into Missouri, get a tough win there. That'd be great, for the resume as well, because Missouri has been very good this year too. So if they can come out of this week at least 1-1, they're on the right track.
At 24, we have Arizona State, a team who's really getting no love. At 15-3, 6-1 in the conference. They got their doors absolutely blown off about a month ago by San Francisco, a real head scratcher. But if you take away that game, they've been a really good team all year. They destroyed our Michigan Wolverines way back in November. And they've just been kind of quietly coasting through Pac-12 play, which is a solid conference this year. But this week they have UCLA coming in, so we'll find out a lot more about them. But this team, they shoot the ball really well most of the time, but when they're off, it's just a nightmare. So they have to avoid those just complete, terrible performances that we've seen a couple times so far.
At 23, we put the NC State Wolfpack out of the ACC in. And this team is another team that's flying under the radar, not just in rankings, but the ACC as well. They're 4-3, so they're hanging around in the middle of the pack right now. But they beat Miami last week in OT, and then they beat Duke the week before. So this team can compete with the top dogs right now in the ACC. And you got to like it. Terquavion Smith, I think that's how you say his name. He's been putting up good numbers these last few weeks. They should have no problem with Georgia Tech, and then obviously North Carolina State. Obviously, is a big game for both of these schools. So if they can walk away 2-0, this NC State team might be even on the rise again next week.
We got the Providence Friars here at number 22. Once again, no expectations going into this season, or tempered expectations at least. And they end up being a really good team, tied for first right now in the Big East. And, they just continue or trail by a half a game, I guess, but they're tied in the loss column. And this team just continues to grind out wins. They're never really going to blow out a lot of teams. That's kind of what we saw last year. But when they get into big games, they typically come out with a win. And this week, they have another big one at Marquette that could really determine the Big East championship at the end of the season. But this team, they just continue to grind. They don't have, they're not the most flashy team, but if they can continue to win big games, I think Ed Cooley is going to be a name that you hear for Coach of the Year, and then maybe for some bigger job openings.
At 21, we got the Florida Atlantic Owls, and we're moving them up. Apparently, I didn't know this, that this week in the AP polls, their first ever ranking. But we had them ranked last week, so we were a little ahead of that. And the Owls, with credit, are 14-1. They, have been really solid this year, doing everything they can do to, prove some winners. They can win games in the Conference USA. They're favorites. They beat the toughest team in the conference, North Texas, by 4. And now they have a very commanding lead, which I think now they're 7-0 or 6-0 in conference. I didn't update it, but this team could be a powerhouse come March, a very low seed. Like I would probably put them right now as the 7-8 seed range and could possibly make some noise getting to the Sweet 16.
At number 20, we have the Baylor Bears, 2-0 week, but this team has struggled to say the least to start Big 12 play. Now they are 2-3, but you always got to give Scott Drew and this Baylor team the benefit of the doubt, especially obviously after winning the national championship a couple years ago. Adam Flagler, Keontae George are two really good guards, which is really important in March. But this week they have two tough road games, so we'll see if they can get back on track because they've struggled on the road so far this year. But like I said, you still have to look out for Baylor because we know from the past that this team can do damage late in the season.
19, the Clemson Tigers are making their first ever ranking, and they are still perfect in the ACC, resulting in them jumping into our rankings. They're 7-0 in conference, have been playing excellent basketball. And last year, I think a lot of people expected them to take the jump to around this position and be a big surprise, but it just didn't happen. But here they are this year. I think they really put all the pieces together, and the core has just gelled very well. And they're probably one of the biggest surprises of the year. And we're going to continue to see them, I think, not dominate, but get some solid wins in ACC play. They should have two easier games this week in ACC play, but college basketball this year has been crazy, so you can't expect too much.
And at 18, we have another ACC team, the Miami Hurricanes. This team was looking like a top 10 team for a while, but they've kind of, fell out of stride a little bit lately. A tough OT loss to NC State, who is a good team. You saw them in our rankings, so nothing too crazy, nothing to hang their head about too much. Tonight, they actually were trailing Syracuse at home for quite a while, ended up coming out with a close win. This weekend's the big one. They go to Duke. For most teams, if you're going to win at Cameron, this is the season to do it because Duke has been struggling mightily lately. So I think if Miami's going to get that road win, this will be the year, and I would not be surprised if they win that game.
17, we got the Charleston Cougars who just keep on rolling. 19-1, 7-0 in conference play. Beat the best team in conference last week in UNC Wilmington. The slipper still fits if you want to say they're the Cinderella of the regular season right now. They just keep on winning games. Their only losses to North Carolina, which, is early in the year. And this team could be another one of those teams that I've already got in this video, could be 8, 9, 10 seed and could do some damage just because this team gelled really well together. They know how to win games and they know how to do it convincingly as well.
We got the Auburn Tigers here at number 16. This has been a tough team to figure out because they put up some just, abysmal performances, including some of their wins when they're scoring, in the low 50s and grinding out a tough win over some subpar teams. And then some games they just look really good. They look like a top 10 team. So if this team can get a little more consistent, I think they're going to start to gain some recognition because they still can be a dangerous team. But this week, two tough road games in the SEC. Obviously, LSU just got blown out by 40, but that's still going to be a tough game. And if they can get through both of those, I think they'll compete for the SEC title.
At 15, the Kansas State Wildcats are falling back just a little bit here, just because they lost to TCU on the road by 14. But, that's their first conference loss. And so far, they are still one of the bigger surprises, not just in the Big 12, but in all of the country. They're 15-2. Kansas State really came out of nowhere after beating Iowa State and another ranked team in conference the week before. And now they get Kansas tomorrow night, I believe, on Tuesday. So when you guys will be seeing this video. And if they can win that game at home, then this Kansas State team might be jumping into the top 10 if they can also beat Texas Tech as well this weekend. So it's going to have to rely on Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel. If those two guys pretty much do what they're doing, their averages are a little more, don't be too surprised if Kansas State has Kansas on the ropes late.
At 14, we have another Big 12 team, the Iowa State Cyclones. Once again, they come out of nowhere and turn out to be a really good team in this conference. They should have probably came out with a win at Allen Fieldhouse. Some questionable calls late in that game, but either way, they showed that they can compete with the best teams in the country. And at 4-1 in the Big 12, with that being their only conference loss, this is a team that could really stay at the top of the conference throughout the whole season. The offense isn't always there, but the defense has been, the force for this team pretty much all year, and that's what we saw last year as well. So I think they're more dangerous this year than they were last year. Last year, remember, they started, I think, like 15-0 and kind of faltered down the stretch, but this year I think they're here to stay.
13, I got TCU, another Big 12 team. And so far, they lost to Texas and beat Kansas State, and they're hanging in there. And we thought this team, was around, closer to the bottom end of the top 25 coming into the year. We didn't have them ranked, but they were pretty close. And so far, they've even impressed us even more than we thought. Mike Miles has been excellent. He's been the guy that they can go to when they need him most. But you're going to look at the biggest game for them this year is this weekend in Allen Fieldhouse against Kansas. If they can go in there, at least make it a game. I'm not saying they have to win, but if they can at least make it a game, stay within a few possessions, even walk out with a 5-point loss, I think that's still a win in a resume standpoint. Obviously, they're going to play to win this game, but you got to take your lump sums and you got to take what you can get at the end of the year. And a 5-point loss will be better than a 20-point loss in Allen Fieldhouse.
And falling down to number 12 is Arizona. This team looked like maybe the best team in the country, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. And then they had that ugly loss to Washington State. And now they get a blowout loss on the road to Oregon, who had been really struggling. This team is really hard to figure out. Last year, they were a little inconsistent, but they were just so talented that it didn't really matter. This year, they have some good scorers, but for some reason, they're just losing to subpar teams, kind of playing down to their competition. So that's something they'll have to figure out in March, or this could be a first weekend exit for Arizona. But as long as they can get this figured out before it's too late, then I think this team still will be really dangerous.
At 11, Virginia's making their way back up as they, struggled for a little bit in conference play, a bad week, and they fell back down. But here they are coming back up and almost entering the top 10 again. And I think, everyone kind of wrote them off after those two straight losses. But here they are flying under the radar, and this is how Virginia likes it. No one's really talking about them, taking care of business, do what they do. And then come March, somehow, some way, this team ends up in the Final Four out of nowhere. It seems like it happens almost every year. And, Tony Bennett and his guys, they do it every year. Besides the losing is a 1 seed and whatnot, I have to bring it up. Sorry, Virginia fans. But, you saw what happened after that. They won it the next year. And they just seem like they have that motto of just next man up and can always get it done when needed.
And falling to 10 here are the Yukon Huskies. All of a sudden, they're 4-4 here in Big East play, losing 2 games this week. And this team, I mean, they looked like potentially a number 1 seed in March, almost a lock a couple weeks ago. And, now they're like a middle of the road team in their own conference, which is kind of crazy to think about. This should be a get right week for them. I know it's a road game, but Seton Hall hasn't been great this year. And then they get Butler at home. So they should be able to get 2 wins there, kind of get back on track. They're still a really good team. And, everyone's vulnerable this year to a couple upsets. We've seen that. So just because they've lost a couple games in a row doesn't mean that they're still not one of the best teams in the country. And I think they'll start to get back on track here in the Big East.
At 9, Gonzaga. And I don't understand what the hype is with the AP poll putting them at 6. This team has not shown enough to me. I mean, obviously we still have them here at 9. It just doesn't seem like this is the same Gonzaga team we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years. They won this week on the road by 1. Last week they won by 2 and I think 3. And one of these times they're going to trip up. I think it's bound to happen. Last year it didn't, but it seems like every year they at least lose one game to St. Mary's. and maybe one to BYU. But I think it's going to be more than that this year. This team obviously has Drew Timmy, but Julian Strother still hasn't been the guy that I thought he would be. I mean, obviously he's almost averaging a little close to a double double, but he's not. And they're really going to need some help when it comes to March because when you play better defenses, like we saw earlier in the year, where they've got shut down at times, and take Timmy out of the game, then what do you got? Because this team doesn't really have as much as it had in years past.
And jumping to number 8, we have Xavier. This is another team that kind of came out of nowhere, but I think it's the Sean Miller effect. Coming back to Xavier, his second time there, and everyone saw what he did at Arizona. I know he bent the rules a little bit, maybe even broke the rules, but he's still a very good basketball coach, and you're starting to see that this season. Xavier now 7-0 in the Big East. I think they got to be the favorite right now with UConn having 4 losses, Villanova out of the picture. I think they have to be the heavy favorite right now to win the Big East title. And this team, they're just really well rounded. They don't have an absolute stud like a lot of these top teams, but they have, 5 to 7 guys that could score in double figures in any game. And that's really getting the job done. And this week, they should have 2 more easy wins, get to 9-0. And I think Xavier is going to have to be a team that people start to recognize as a top ten team going forward.
At 7, Tennessee is falling out of the top 10. And this is because they had that ugly loss at home to Kentucky. And yes, Kentucky is still a good team, but they haven't been playing like that team until this game. So they got to bounce back this week with 2 tough road games. And, Mississippi State and LSU are teams that just are missing out on, being ranked and others receiving votes. So a big win for either of those teams. They can pull off an upset. I'm sure we will see them here in our video next week. And, this Tennessee team, had high expectations coming into the year, preseason top 10 by our standards. And I think they're kind of right where we thought they would be right now in SEC play record wise. So no need to hit the panic button. I thought a lot of people would have assumed that Kentucky would have won that game anyways, because, coming into the year, they were a top 3 team in the country. So no need to hit the panic button yet if you're a Tennessee fan. If they lose both these weeks, then you might have to hit that button.
At number 6, we have Texas here. 2 very close wins this week, but I'm very impressed with them. Obviously, they went through that whole Chris Beard situation and had some kind of ugly performances after that. I thought this team would kind of just falter. Obviously the Big 12 is absolutely loaded, so there's no off nights, and I thought that would really start to get to them. But props to them, a 2-0 week. This week they go to Iowa State and they go to West Virginia, so 2 tough road games in the conference. But Texas is starting to look like they're here to stay. It doesn't look like they're just going to pack it in after losing their head coach. I don't know if they're quite a national championship level team anymore, but they're still a team that's going to compete for the Big 12 title and still could make a Final Four at the end of the year.
At 5, we got UCLA, and this team is going on the road to face 24 Arizona State and 12 Arizona this week. So they got a big matchup in the desert, to say the least, especially for those Pac-12 rankings as well, as Arizona State is 6-1 and UCLA is 7-0. So one of those teams is going to be tied for the lead or possibly in a very healthy lead coming out of Tuesday, I think Tuesday or Wednesday's matchup. UCLA, this is the week where they can start to pull away if they can get both these games, because 9-0 and they play 20 games, and you're already sitting there beating the 2 best, well, right now the 2 best teams record wise in the conference is always a huge boost. So if you're a Bruins fan, this is definitely the biggest week for your team.
Coming in at number 4, we have Alabama. Just a dominant week by them. They start to look like the number 1 team in the country in my eyes. Obviously, the 2 losses are what's holding them back. Win over Arkansas on the road was very impressive, even after what happened to Arkansas after that. That's still a really tough place to play, and to come out with a 15-point win, and then follow it up with a 40-point win over a tournament team in LSU. It's not like LSU is just a walkover. So very impressive week by them. But you got to bring up the Darius Miles charges, whatever's going on. Will that be a distraction to the team? Is that going to disrupt the momentum they have going right now? Who knows? But you're going to find out right away because they have 2 road games this week against 2 hot teams. So we'll find out. This team has been looking like potentially the best team in the country, but some distractions coming at a really bad time. We'll see how that impacts them.
At 3, we got the Kansas Jayhawks, and this team escapes by 4 at home to Oklahoma and have to gut out a win against Iowa State by 2. Kansas, you gotta like where you're at. You're winning these close games, playing in some good, tough games, and that only helps you come March. And they get to do it again this week, which I would assume would be some similar games with going on the road to Kansas State tomorrow night and then TCU at home this weekend. And I think they will lose one of those games. Not sure which one it will be, but I think they will. They're just destined to lose at some point in the Big 12. That conference is going to beat each other up all year. And Kansas, I think they're going to start to find that out this week.
At number 2, we have the Houston Cougars, a team that's kind of struggled through a couple games. And I don't know if it's like the Gonzaga effect where they just get kind of bored, to be honest, playing in their weak conference. But they struggled with a 7-10 South Florida team. Obviously, nothing to write home about there, but they do get the win. I think this team just has to continue to get up for every game, even if it's Tulane or Temple. They have to continue to play their best ball because, any given night, a road game could trip them up, as you see with Gonzaga in the West Coast Conference. Sometimes it just seems like they get bored in conference play and they get tripped up. But if Houston's going to be a national championship team, they got to just continue to run through the American Conference. And I think this will be a wake up call for them, and I think they'll continue to just dominate here, and they'll be a Final Four contender by the end of the year.
And at 1, of course, we got the Purdue Boilermakers, who are now 17-1 and 6-1 in conference play after a very, very gritty, lucky performance. No fouls on Zach Edey. I mean, whatever you want to call that game, they did it and escaped in Michigan State at the buzzer. And Purdue, a win is a win. No one's going to look back in 2 months and be like, oh, this exact date, this happened, come on, it's March. This team has clearly been the best team in college basketball this year. But a lot of people on Twitter are safe to say that they're one Zach Edey rolled ankle away from being a fraud. And, you got to take it how it is. He is the team. Look at his stats right there, averaging over 20 and 13 rebounds a game. You take that away, their bigs, well, that's a big question mark after that. So pretty much Purdue fans, you got to pray for Zach Edey to stay healthy the whole year if you want to see this dominance to stay at top at number 1. But that's going to be it for our video this week. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button to be entered into our giveaway and come back next week to see where your favorite teams rank. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.
She never called back.